Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. Usually I'm bringing this guy on from Philadelphia to relive Orioles' days of yesteryear and glories of Oriole championships and the strategy of Earl Weaver and the 3-run home run. But alas, we're not going to talk about his newfound Phillies up there in Philadelphia. He's a longtime columnist, working in many places, including Baltimore, and the longtime home of an Orioles fan who makes these sojourns down from Philadelphia. But writing a book on all things Smokin Joe and the life of Joe Frazier, the son of a great writer and a pretty good writer himself. We welcome Kram Jr. back on to WNST to discuss the book, which, look, we promoted this a couple months ago when you and I were talking Oriole baseball, and I said we would come back on and revisit this. And I said the Orioles will be in like last place by then because there's no sixth place, Mark. So welcome in after Memorial Day. Congratulations on getting another book put out here and on something that I know is very, very near and dear to your heart. And it's taken you a long time and literally, at least half a lifetime to cull this information, right?
Well, if you think about it, sure. I first saw Joe fight when I was senior at Loyola High School. My dad brought me to New York for a fight at the Garden, and Joe was fighting Jerry Quarry for the second time. It was the first professional prize fight I'd seen, and boy, what a moment! So from that point on, through 35 years as a sports writer, I got to know Joe and got to know the people around him, and eventually my notebook got pretty full, so I decided to put it in a book.
All right, so you were how old when you met Joe Frazier, and how old was he? And look, I know you we're not going to go through the whole story of your father, but your father's significant in this.
Yes, well, he was...
Tell the story of... A lot of people don't know that you were born in Baltimore, went to Loyola. Your sort of Baltimore accent has meandered into South Philly in some way, Mark. I want to let you know that. In the laugh,
South
too.
South Jersey, more like...
Yeah, more like Jersey. I'm hearing a little bit of what Baldinger's got going on coming down from Massapequa. So, but everybody in Philly gets it. I was there on Saturday or Friday night for Billy Joel. I got the hell out of there.
I went to the Who. I went to the Who the next night.
I went to the Who Saturday night. So, yeah, I got myself... I finally went to John's Roast Pork for the first time in my life, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
Thumbs down. I got the Philly treatment, and when you come to Philly and you get treated like garbage, you come to expect it, but you never really want to welcome it back on. Hey, order over there. The hops are over there. No. You want roast pork, it's over here. If you want the cheesesteak, it's over there. If you want the wits, it's over there. And we ain't got no lettuce, we ain't got any tomato. And if you want any Heinz ketchup, you go down the street and get it. Is that pretty good?
Yeah, you got it. You hit it pretty good. That's
right.
Exactly
that's
right.
That's how I got treated, and the roll was soppy, and I'm not going back. But that's my hit for that. But tell your dad's story a little bit, and the story of how you meandered into this situation.
Right. Dad was, for years, he began his career at the Baltimore Sun as a sports columnist in the early 60s, and then moved on to Sports Illustrated, where he became the lead boxing writer. And he covered the Ali Frazier fights, all three of them, and really did some magnificent work in the field. And, I sort of followed in his, well, not sort of, I did follow in his footsteps, and became a writer at the Baltimore News-American when in its last days, and then moved on to Detroit, the Free Press, and then to Philly in 1987. And it was that point I got to know Joe during the latter part of his life, say the last 15 or 20 years of his life. And so I caught him on the tail end of things, and Dad had gotten him in the beginning. So,
well, you got the storytelling part of it, right? Like, you had your dad's stories and his stories as to how it all related to Ali. And look, these stories have been told in every direction, right? They've been told from Joe's story, Ali's story, the media story, the race side, the political side. All of these tales have been told. What's your tale on this? What's your side that made, because I'm sure you've read it all, you've heard it all, right? But this side of it for you to tell it at this point in the aftermath of all of it, maybe one last time. And Mark, I'll let you know this, and just as a little, because some of my audience may have heard this. I sat with Alan Goldstein toward the end of his life, but he was still very, very lucid. I want to say it was
Yeah.
2006.
Alan was a great friend over the years.
And Goldie was a great friend to me, too, and an incredible mentor. And all that stuff's up in the buyatoyota.com audio vault if you want to listen to 2.5 hours of me and Alan telling old bullet stories and whatnot. But he told the boxing stories and wrote a book on Ali. I mean, everybody of that era, it was the story to tell, right? It's like if you covered basketball, you write about Jordan. If you cover golf, you write about Tiger. You wrote about baseball, you wrote about Mickey Mantle, whatever it was. But in the aftermath of all of this, still to have people around like you that are here to sort of put one more look at it, that's what I'm looking forward to the most in the book.
It's true that Ali and Frazier had been written exhaustively through the years. In fact, my father did a book called Ghost of Manila in 2001, which recounted the Ali Frazier trilogy of fights. However, I wanted to uncouple Joe from Ali as much as I could, and sort of seeing him on his own terms.
Because he only lived with Ali in the ring a handful of times, and and a couple of. I mean, he had his own life outside of Ali, in the same way Bill Buckner had a life outside of a ball that went between his legs. Literally.
Exactly, that's exactly right. And what I wanted to do was take a deep dive into that life, and to sort of see what was there, sort of tell the story of the man as much as the fighter, and the other thing was that he had been at the end of his life. Not much had been written about that aspect of it, and the other part of it is too, Nestor. When you let some time pass, people around him are more apt to loosen up and discuss, in reflection about someone, as opposed to, talking about someone when they're still living. So I sort of let the dust clear a little bit and sort of get people to sort of reflect on him. And a lot of people were sort of, there were only a few people really still around, but some key people I was able to get to and really told his story in real depth, which I think this book sort of makes this book work.
I know you also, his son also fought, and give me some sort of a scope of Philly. And I'll say this, Mark, I've spent my life going to Philly to concerts, right? I've been to Manny Yunk. I've been downtown. I had my car broken into outside the Marriott one night. I've been to All-Star games. I've been to I've never been inside the museum. I've never run up the Rocky Steps. I mean, I had never had a John's roast pork till last week. So I've only been to the corner where the cheesesteak places are three or four
right.
times in my life, literally. And I've only driven through South Philly on the side streets a handful of times. My grandfather's brother grew up right off of Packer in Oregon in South Philly, had a bakery, Italian bakery in the 70s, mid-70s. I would come up there and see those side streets during the era where Rocky was filmed. You know what I mean? That's the Philly I remember,
absolutely.
right? And for the first time, I drove down Oregon out of John's Roast Pork, and I didn't make the left to go into the parking lot. I kind of went around, and I saw how fragmented the neighborhoods are there and how unique. Unique in not a Highland town or a Canton or a Baltimore way, unique in a almost European look to the way the neighborhoods are.
Right, the streets are very narrow.
The streets are weird, and the corners are weird, and the gentrification of all of it now and where it's coming from and what we would want Baltimore to look like, and I'm doing this Baltimore Positive. Give me a little view of Joe Frazier as you knew him the last 25 years of his life, and he was still very much hanging around gyms and boxers and go get him champ and all. Like, he did not live in the Rocky Mansion on the hill, right? Like the movie, right?
No, he actually lived upstairs from the gym for many years.
That's the way I envisioned it. That's the way I always saw it. And when some John Saraceno would show up there 25 years ago with an ESPN camera or somebody, your dad or somebody would be there, I always felt like he lived the Rocky life. He lived like Burgess Meredith above a gym 20 years after he fought in the middle of all these fights that happened. He lived a pretty humble life in the end, as I saw it. Different than Ali, that flew around on jets and had that kind of a life, right?
Well, Joe was very anchored in Philadelphia, although he did travel quite a bit in his latter years. He, when he got out of boxing, and even before he got out of boxing, he started training or working with fighters at the gym. And through the 80s, he had not only his son Marvis, but some nephews and another son, Hector, who went by the name of Joe Frazier Jr. And he trained them. They were called the Fighting Fraziers, but none of them had the raw tenacity and that Joe had. If he was trying to shape them into some facsimile of himself, it really didn't work. There was only one Joe Frazier, and so he trained up until the 80s, early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, and then was around the gym, was around the neighborhood, was really kind of a creature of his environment. You know, he really. He was a beloved figure in Philadelphia.
Mark, I can't begin to tell you how many times in the 90s and 2000s we would just call up to the gym up there. Joe would answer the phone. He'd come on and do radio with us. I mean,
right. Joe had no pretense at all,
Yeah, look, and Joe would get in the car and come down to the ballroom fights with Scotty Wagner down at Michael's 8th Avenue.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like Joe was getting $5,000 to do it. Because Scott didn't have it to give him. You know what I mean? But I think taking good care of him and whoever his people were and whatever. I mean, he was Joe friggin' Frazier, for crying out loud, right?
Joe loved people, and if you treated him well, he treated you well. That's what it came down to. He was a really a good guy.
Did you love Joe? I mean, right? Can you honestly say that you loved Joe? That you had a deep friendship with him in the aftermath of all this?
I wouldn't call it a deep friendship. I'd say that I certainly respected him and admired many things that he had done. And let's face it, he came up from Beaufort, South Carolina as a young kid. He took the bus north when he was only 15 years old. As part of he was on the tail end of the great migration of African Americans from the South, and came to New York and was stealing cars and getting into, on the edges of getting into some trouble, some real irreversible trouble. And, he found his way to the gyms in Philadelphia and came under the, guidance of the cops and, who were running the gym, and turned his life around. And,
tell me about the cops running the gym, because we have a lot of problems in Baltimore, Mark. I'm not telling you. You grew up here, right? And you're in Philly, and, we had unrest at the Harbor again the other night, and I've been talking about that all week. We're trying to talk about ways to make Baltimore better. Cops taking on young people in a gym to box. Man,
exactly.
Not atypical in the 40s or 50s or 60s, right? Like that.
Absolutely. Well, it was called the Police Athletic League, the PAL. And Joe's sister, who was living in Philadelphia at the time, said, "Look, Joe, if you get into trouble, there's nothing I can do for you in Philly, But why don't you go to the gym?" And he was an overweight kid. He was about 30 pounds overweight, couldn't fit into his clothes, and so he loved his sister and took her advice and went to the gym and began working out, lost the weight. He hit the heavy bag. They noticed the power that it was like a crack. When he hit the heavy bag, he had this natural power in his left hand. And the cops took care of him, and they looked after him. They gave him guidance. That's essential in a lot of ways. I really think we're missing something as a society to have let that pass out of the scene. The PALs. The lack of funding, for instance, caused it to sort of fade from the scene. But I really do think it was valuable, not just for Joe, but for many people.
Mark Kram Jr. is our guest, as always, bringing the heat and bringing the knowledge. He's written a book on Smokin Joe Frazier, the life of Joe Frazier. You can find it out on Amazon. You can order it. It's out this week. A gripping all-access biography of Joe Frazier. I'm reading from the Cliff Notes here. Whose rivalry with Muhammad Ali riveted boxing fans and whose legacy as a figure in American sports and society endures. And Mark's important because he's a Baltimorean, an Oriole fan who has been somehow tucked away up there in the swamps of Jersey, somewhere near Joe Flacco over on the east wing of the Philadelphia side. How far from Flacco do you live up there, Mark Kram?
About 2 miles.
2 miles.
Yeah,
How's Joe doing,
seen him
man?
around.
What's Joe's legacy up there? Tell me. You say you see Joe around with a golf course?
No. I'd see him in delis and so forth here and there. We'd sort of cross paths. Certainly one of the great athletes that come out of this region.
He'll get a second act in Denver, so we'll see how that goes. We get our second act down here. For you with the book and like a tour and who's available and who's around, who's left that can talk about this? I mean, George Foreman, right? Is one.
No, actually, I was going for more people that were more personally involved with Joe. His confidants and the people he relied on through the years. And one person that was really essential was his longtime companion, Denise Menz, who hadn't really talked to anybody through the years. She sort of was in the shadows. And she was with Joe for, 42 years, 43 years. And, she really painted a picture of Joe that really no one really had gotten to before. And so that was invaluable. So I got that aspect of it. I wanted to get primary sources because, let's face it, if this book were done 10 years from now, a writer would be relying nothing but clips and video. But I wanted to talk to the people who, right from their vantage point, the people who actually knew Joe and went through his trials and tribulations with him. And that was the aim of the book, to sort of get these people on the record so we have a true picture that generations from now, when people read it, they'll be reading the story from people's vantage point that actually experienced Joe,
Well, and I would say that the last word on all this for me would be for you and Ali, because we haven't talked about the Ali thing. Where do you put the Ali thing in the Frazier story and portraying it in this book? Obviously, it's significant because when you say one word, you say the other word, right?
Right.
And it is that, it's like salt and pepper, it's like peanut butter and jelly or whatever. They did go together, much to the chagrin probably of Scottie Pippen in the Jordan case, or anyone else who's ever been the other guy in that storyline. But what would you say about their relationship, or what would be significant in the aftermath now that they both have left us?
Well, it's true. You can't. They're inseparable in many ways, and certainly in the public imagination, they're inseparable. It was once said that they brought out the best of each other inside the ring and the worst of each other outside of the ring. They were. I mean, the running feud that they had outside the ring, you could fill volumes with. And Joe's feelings about Ali waxed and waned over the years. He was, on one hand, he was absolutely furious at Ali for years about the way Ali ridiculed him and insulted him. But on the other hand, there would be moments that he would be, he had basically a kind nature, Joe. I mean, he was basically a good man that way. So, the question I had, did he carry this animosity to his grave? Was Joe still kind of a disdainful of Ali, at the end of his life? And I think I answered the question in the book. At the end of the book, I sort of resolved that. And I think that Joe and Ali came to peace at the end.
He is Mark Kram Jr., Smokin Joe, the life of Joe Frazier. When he is not writing books about boxing and Smokin Joe, he is suffering with the rest of us because he still watches the Orioles, don't you, Mark?
I do. Well, you can't get them on you can't get them on television too much up here. Outside of Baltimore, I can't imagine anybody would be interested in the Orioles at this point. I mean, it's disgraceful what they've let that franchise deteriorate.
By the way, that's the word I use, disgraceful. I mean, that's a writer's word. That's your word. That's the word I've been using for 20 years.
You know why it's disgraceful? It's disgraceful that they're charging major league prices for a double-A product. And, it's just, it's awful. It's really
I had a
awful.
conversation with a friend of mine who has a restaurant, a delicious Italian restaurant, East Side. I'm over there getting some meatballs over to Michi's. And we were just talking about baseball and whatever. And I said to them, if you told me your meatballs would be good 3 or 4 years from now, I wouldn't eat them. I would just come back. If you said to me, look, we're going to serve it cold for a couple of years here, even though you don't like it cold and it doesn't taste as good cold, it's still meatballs and it's still meat sauce. It's just cold. So we're going to serve it cold. I don't like it cold. I want it warm. Well, come back in 3 years. We'll give it to you warm.
Come back in 3 years.
And I'm like, I wouldn't come back. Nobody would endure that. In any restaurant, in any business, anywhere you go, my show's going to suck for the next 3 years. Come back in 3 years or come back every day.
You're exactly right. And look, I'm not one of these guys that need to be in the World Series or even the playoffs every year, but I want a competitive team. This is not even a competitive team. I don't even know what this is.
It's easy to be awful when you're not trying, right?
When you got a guy last week, a couple weeks ago, a guy ball hit the second base and he's running the runner back to first base. I mean, I don't see that on the Little League field down the street.
Throwing to the wrong guy in the cutoff, not getting other pop-ups.
Fundamentals.
Home runs, walks.
I'll tell you, Nestor, it's going to be a long, long time before they're good again. A long time. I don't even know where to begin. I really do think in a lot of ways they took too deep of a haircut last year when they traded all those guys.
Well, it's just there's no strategy, right? You trade all those guys and then you throw away the guy who traded them.
Yeah, I mean, why would you empower him to make the trades and then fire him?
Because you don't know what you're doing. Yes.
I mean, really, let's face it. I mean, it's totally backward way of running things. So they bring in the guy from Houston, and now he's got to work with Duquette's, trades. It's crazy. And I mean, at least if they had some of those players, they could possibly make a case for buying a ticket. But I just can't see it. I don't. And you never bet on minor leaguers that way. I can't imagine that. Because they're mostly, it's hit and miss, and it's mostly miss.
Well, we're going to be seeing mostly miss and learning about the Delmarva Shorebirds all summer. Mark Kram Jr. is Smokin Joe, The Life of Joe Frazier, the book out now, a gripping all-access biography of the man himself, Smokin Joe Frazier. Always good to get with you, Mark. Had I known you were doing the Who Show Saturday, I might have just found a cot and stayed up there again. We would have done that.
Slept in my garage.
Hey, by the way, did you see the Jimmy Fallon Who Won't Get Fooled again on the kids' toys on YouTube or Facebook?
No, I didn't see it.
Go to my Facebook page. I put it up there about 2 weeks ago. But
hey, they were pretty good. They were really good, I thought.
I like Roger Daltrey a lot. So yeah, Billy Joel was good too. The only night we're going to have a full crowd down at Camden Yards, my mom's 100th birthday. Billy Joel playing Camden Yards on July 26th. So we're looking forward to that.
That's great. Well, happy birthday to your mom. That's great.
Bottle of red, a bottle of white, whatever kind of mood you're in tonight. There he goes, Mark Kram Jr. The book is Smokin Joe, The Life of Joe Frazier. You can find that anywhere books are sold. And Mark, of course, a Loyola guy, despite that Philadelphia accent that he's acquired from Joe Flacco up there in Haddonfield. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. We're in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.